In the last episode, we left off with a group of rebels fighting against the corrupt government, led by a young girl who had discovered her unique abilities and vowed to bring change to the world. The girl's name was Lyra, and her journey began when she stumbled upon an ancient artifact that awakened her powers. Joined by a group of unlikely allies, Lyra set out to uncover the truth behind the government's tyranny and bring justice to the people. They embarked on a perilous quest, facing treacherous landscapes, ruthless mercenaries, and unexpected betrayals. Now, as Lyra stood at the edge of the city, gazing out at the sprawling metropolis, her heart raced with anticipation and fear. Tonight was the night they would put their plan into action. Tonight they would take the first step towards toppling the corrupt regime. Lyra's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to see her trusted friend and ally Kale walking towards her. His eyes gleamed with determination and his hand rested on the hilt of his sword. "You ready for this, Lyra?" he asked. Lyra took a deep breath and nodded. "I was born ready." Together, they descended into the city, their footsteps echoing off the buildings. The air was thick with tension, and Lyra's senses were on high alert. They knew the government would stop at nothing to silence them, and Lyra's group had to be prepared to fight. As they navigated through the crowded streets, Lyra's mind raced with the plan they had meticulously devised. They had gathered evidence of the government's corruption, from embezzlement to murder, and were ready to present it to the people. But they knew it wouldn't be easy. The government would do everything in its power to discredit them, and Lyra's group had to be prepared to face the consequences. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Aria, a young hacker who had joined their cause. Her eyes darted nervously around the street, and Lyra's instincts told her something was wrong. "What is it, Aria?" Lyra asked. "I've intercepted a message from one of the government's top officials." "Lyra, it seems they are onto us. They know about our plan." Lyra's heart sank, but she didn't have time to process the information. Sirens blared in the distance, and the sound of boots pounding the pavement grew louder. "They've found us," Kale yelled. Lyra drew her sword, the familiar weight of it a comfort in her hand. She and her allies prepared to face off against the government's forces, their fate hanging in the balance. The battle for truth and justice had begun, and Lyra was ready to fight. The sound of sirens grew louder, and Lyra's group readied themselves for battle. Aria darted off to the side, her fingers flying across her holographic keyboard as she worked to disrupt the government's communications. Kale stood shoulder to shoulder with Lyra, his sword at the ready. "We need to hold them off until Aria can hack into the mainframe," he shouted above the din. Lyra nodded, her heart racing with adrenaline. She closed her eyes, focusing on the energy within her. It responded to her call, coursing through her veins like liquid fire. The first government trooper turned the corner, rifle raised. Lyra opened her eyes and with a flick of her wrist sent the trooper flying across the street. Her allies cheered, but Lyra knew it was only the beginning. More troopers poured into the streets surrounding Lyra's group. Kale fought with precision, taking down trooper after trooper. Aria's hacking skills allowed her to disable the government's drones, giving Lyra's group an advantage. But as the battle raged on, Lyra began to feel a strange tingling sensation in her fingers. It was as if her powers were growing stronger, more unstable. She stumbled, almost losing her footing. Kale caught her arm, his eyes locked on hers. "Lyra, what's wrong?" "I don't know," Lyra panted. "My powers, they're getting out of control." Aria rushed to their side, her eyes wide with worry. "We need to get you out of here, Lyra, now." Lyra shook her head, determination burning within her. "We can't leave. We have to see this through." But as she raised her sword to face the next wave of troopers, Lyra felt the tingling sensation spread throughout her body. Her vision began to blur, and her senses were overwhelmed by the energy coursing through her veins. Suddenly, the world around her went white. When Lyra opened her eyes, she found herself lying on the rooftop of a nearby building. Kale and Aria were crouched beside her, their faces etched with concern. "Lyra, can you hear me?" Kale asked, his voice soft. Lyra nodded, still dazed. What happened?" "You lost control of your powers," Arya said gently. "We had to get you out of there before you hurt yourself or someone else." Lyra sat up, her head spinning. She gazed out at the city, the sounds of battle still echoing through the streets. "We can't give up," she said, her voice firm. "We have to keep fighting." Kale and Arya exchanged a worried glance, but Lyra knew they would stand by her. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, no matter the cost. As they descended back into the streets, Lyra felt the energy within her stirring once more. This time she was ready. This time she would master her powers, no matter what it took. But little did Lyra know, a new threat was emerging from the shadows. A figure watched her from the rooftop of a nearby building, their eyes fixed on Lyra with an unnerving intensity. The game was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The streets erupted into chaos as the government's forces descended upon them. Lyra and her allies fought valiantly, taking down soldiers and dodging attacks. Lyra's powers surged through her, amplifying her strength and agility. She sliced through the enemy's ranks, her sword flashing in the dim light. Kale fought by her side, his sword clashing with that of a burly mercenary. Lyra dispatched the man with a swift kick, sending him crashing to the ground. Arya, meanwhile, worked her magic from the shadows, hacking into the government's communication systems to disrupt their coordination. She directed Lyra's group through the maze of streets, guiding them away from danger and towards their objective. As the battle raged on, Lyra's senses began to tingle. She felt the presence of another power, one that threatened to tip the scales in the government's favor. "It's the commander," Lyra whispered to Kale, her eyes locked on the tall, imposing figure emerging from the fray. "He's the one who's been hunting us." Kale's grip on his sword tightened. "Let's take him down." Lyra nodded, her focus laser-sharp. Together they charged towards the commander, their blades ringing out in a deadly dance. The commander sneered at Lyra, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're no match for me, girl. I'll crush you and your rebellion." Lyra's rage ignited, fueling her determination. She and Kale fought with ferocity, but the commander's powers were formidable. He sent Lyra flying across the street, her sword slipping from her grasp. Kale rushed to her side, helping her to her feet. "Lyra, we need to get out of here now." Lyra's eyes flashed with defiance. "Not yet. I won't let him win." With a newfound ferocity, Lyra launched herself at the commander, determined to bring him down. The outcome was far from certain, but Lyra was ready to fight to the death. For her allies, and for the future of their world. As the battle raged on, Lyra's thoughts turned to the mysterious artifact that had started it all. The ancient relic held secrets she was yet to uncover, secrets that could turn the tide of the war. But for now, Lyra had to focus on survival. She and her allies had to escape the city, regroup, and plan their next move. The war was far from over, and Lyra was ready to face whatever lay ahead. With a final burst of strength, Lyra and her allies fought their way out of the city, leaving the commander and his forces behind. They vanished into the night, their fate hanging in the balance as they set their sights on the next step in their rebellion. As they fled, Lyra's thoughts turned to the enigmatic figure who had been guiding her from the shadows, the one who had awakened her powers and set her on this path. Who was this mysterious ally, and what did they want from Lyra? The question swirled in Lyra's mind as she and her allies disappeared into the darkness, their future uncertain, but their resolve unbroken. The sounds of chaos erupted around them as the government's forces closed in. Lyra's group formed a tight circle, backs against each other, ready to defend themselves against the onslaught. Kale stood shoulder to shoulder with Lyra, his sword flashing in the dim light of the city streets. Arya darted between them, her fingers flying across her holographic display as she worked to disrupt the government's signals. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, her senses on high alert. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her unique abilities humming in the background. She focused on the present, her sword rising to meet the first wave of attackers. The clash of steel on steel echoed through the streets, the sound of shouting and screams filling the air. Lyra's group fought valiantly, holding their own against the government's forces. But Lyra knew they couldn't keep this up for long. They needed to get to the central square where the people were gathering, waiting to hear their message. As they pushed forward, Lyra caught glimpses of the city's inhabitants peeking out from behind doors and windows. Some looked frightened, others looked hopeful. Lyra knew they were the key to their success. If they could just get the people on their side, they might have a chance to overthrow the corrupt government. A sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet. Lyra stumbled, her sword slipping from her grasp. Kale caught her, his arm wrapping around her waist as he pulled her towards him. Arya cried out, her holographic display shattered, sparks flying everywhere. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as she saw Arya stumble, her eyes wide with fear. "No, no, no," Lyra yelled, her voice hoarse from the smoke and chaos. Kale pushed Lyra towards Arya, his sword flashing as he defended them against the attackers. Lyra grabbed Arya's arm, pulling her to safety just as another explosion went off. The world around them erupted into chaos, the sound of gunfire and screams filling the air. Lyra's group was being pushed back, their chances of succeeding dwindling by the minute. But Lyra refused to give up. She pulled Arya to her feet, her eyes locked on the central square in the distance. They had to get there, no matter what. "Come on," Lyra yelled, her voice carrying above the din. Kale and Arya followed her, their footsteps pounding the pavement as they fought their way through the government's forces. Lyra's sword flashed in the dim light, her unique abilities burning bright as they pushed forward, determined to bring truth and justice to the people. They finally reached the central square, the crowd parting as they emerged from the chaos. Lyra stood tall, her sword held high, as she gazed out at the sea of faces. "We did it," she thought, a sense of pride and hope surging through her chest. But as she looked out at the crowd, Lyra's eyes met those of a man she had never seen before. He stood at the edge of the square, his eyes locked on hers, a cold, calculating glint in his gaze. Lyra's heart sank, her senses screaming warning. This man was trouble, and she knew they weren't out of danger, yet the streets erupted into chaos as police officers and government agents swarmed around them. Lyra's group formed a tight circle, back to back, as they prepared to defend themselves. Kale stood tall, his sword flashing in the dim light, while Arya worked her magic on her comms device, trying to hack into the government systems to disable their reinforcements. Lyra, meanwhile, focused on the energy coursing through her veins. She had mastered her powers, but she knew she couldn't hold out for long against such overwhelming odds. She needed to think, to come up with a plan to get them out of this alive. As the agents closed in, Lyra raised her hands and a blast of energy repelled them. She took advantage of the momentary distraction to glance around, her eyes locking onto a narrow alleyway between two buildings. "Kale, Arya, follow me," she yelled, sprinting towards the alley. Her friends didn't hesitate, and together they dashed into the narrow passage. The agents were hot on their heels, but Lyra used her powers to create a barrier, blocking their pursuit. For a moment they caught their breath, listening to the sounds of the agents trying to break through the barrier. Lyra knew it wouldn't hold for long, they needed to keep moving. "Arya, can you get us a new route?" Lyra asked, already knowing the answer. "I'm on it," Lyra replied Arya, her fingers flying across her comms device. The alleyway was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of decay. Lyra's senses were on high alert, her heart racing with every creak and groan of the old buildings. Suddenly, Arya gasped, her eyes fixed on the device. "What is it?" Lyra asked, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her sword. "I've found a way out, but we need to move now," Arya replied. Lyra didn't hesitate, leading her friends through the winding alleys and side streets. They dodged and weaved, avoiding government agents and police officers, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, they saw a small, unassuming door hidden behind a dumpster. Arya worked her magic and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow stairway that led down into darkness. "In now," Lyra yelled, pushing her friends towards the door. As they descended into the unknown, Lyra felt a sense of relief wash over her. They had made it out of the city for now. but she knew the government wouldn't stop until they had captured or killed her and her friends. The question was, what lay ahead? And could Lyra and her allies emerge victorious in the end? Lyra's sword flashed in the moonlight as she charged forward, her allies at her side. The government's forces, clad in black armor, swarmed the streets, their rifles and batons at the ready. The air was electric with tension, the sound of clashing steel and shouts filling the air. Kale fought with precision, his sword slicing through the enemy ranks like a hot knife through butter. Arya hacked into the government's communication systems, disrupting their coordination and leaving them scattered and disorganized. Lyra, meanwhile, relied on her instincts, her sword moving in arcs of light as she danced between the enemy's attacks. Despite being outnumbered, Lyra's group held their own, their determination and conviction driving them forward. But Lyra knew they couldn't keep this up for much longer. The government would soon bring in reinforcements and they would be overwhelmed. She glanced around, her eyes locking onto a nearby alleyway. It was narrow, with tall buildings on either side, but it could provide them with a temporary reprieve. Kale, Arya now, Lyra shouted, her voice carrying above the din of battle. Her allies followed her, ducking into the alleyway as Lyra covered their retreat. The government's forces hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Lyra took advantage of the pause, using her powers to create a localized distortion in the space-time continuum. The alleyway seemed to ripple and flex, the buildings on either side melting into a blur of color and sound. Lyra's allies stumbled, disoriented, but she grabbed their arms, holding them steady as the world around them warped and distorted. "We have to keep moving," Lyra urged, her voice low and urgent. "We can't let them regroup." They emerged from the alleyway, Lyra's powers dissipating as they spilled back onto the streets. The government's forces were reorganizing, their commander, a cold-eyed woman named Agent Ross, shouting orders as she coordinated her troops. Lyra's group knew they had to be quick. They had to get their evidence to the people, to expose the government's corruption and bring them to justice. But Agent Ross was determined to stop them, and Lyra knew she would do everything in her power to silence them. The battle raged on, the outcome hanging precariously in the balance. Lyra's powers were growing stronger, her connection to the ancient artifact deepening. But Agent Ross was relentless, driven by a desire for power and control. As the two forces clashed, Lyra realized that this was more than just a fight for truth and justice. This was a fight for the very soul of their world, and Lyra was willing to do whatever it took to save it.